So did your grandma tell you stories about the Rougarous going to get you?
You better believe it. You better believe it. It's not that scary though, because I don't know. There are certain things in the real world that are scarier than the Rougarou.
I told you my wife's Mexican. They call it the cucuy.
Okay, so that's
like the boogeyman.
Yeah,
the
cucuy and the Rougarou. Watch out.
Welcome to Travel Matters, the official podcast of TBEX. Here's your host, TBEX CEO Rick Calvert.
All right, we are back at TBEX North America 2022 in Lafayette, and our guest is Toby Doré. Do you pronounce it Doré or Dor?
Doré.
Doré.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard people calling you different versions.
Oh, yeah.
All locals, not just me, So, well, thank you for joining, Toby, and welcome.
Thank you.
So how many TBEXs have you been to now?
This is my third. I was in Billings and
we
in
first met
Tri-Cities.
in Billings.
Yeah, the very end.
Yeah.
Right.
The closing. I don't think it was the official closing party, but a bunch of people were at this bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
you were with Kevin Flint. Was that you? No, that was another guy. I thought Kevin Flint and this other guy were like best buddies, but no, they didn't even know each other. But they were hanging out that night. I'm like, oh yeah, you guys traveling? And he's like, no, I didn't even know that dude. So,
well, I mean, I walked in, I saw Jesse right the first day.
From Lafayette.
And we both said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? I don't remember who it was who started it. And I was like, oh, I have a travel blog. And he's like, oh, I didn't know that. And he was like, well, we're sponsoring the event. And then I was like, wow, that's pretty neat. Well, the way it works at TravelCon, because I had gone to TravelCon that year, and I was like, the way it works is the sponsors, we figured that out later. Like, the sponsors usually mean that city's going to probably host soon. And
it's a chance. I mean, we got multiple destinations here, but yes.
But it was just,
the host of the next year is most likely a sponsor that's in the room. That's absolutely true. Yeah. Because, and for people who don't know this, we require people sponsor TBEX before they host it. Because we want them to know what this animal is, right? Because you can't really fully understand it till you've been and seen it.
Of course.
You know? And especially for a city that's hosting, because it's a huge commitment to do that, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Toby, let's talk about, because you got a lot of irons in the fire, man, and I always wondered, why do you come to TBEX? But this time we had you speak at TBEX. What made you come the first time?
So I always had a vision of traveling around the world, even since high school. It's written in my yearbook, and way back then. I still have it at home. When I was 17, 18, graduating from high school, there were plans to travel around the world. And I thought that by getting my PhD, and especially when I got to college and master's degree, I saw these professors, I would come back home and they weren't in their offices. And then I learned it was optional to teach in the summer. So I started traveling in the summertime. And I always had this vision also that you had to make all kinds of extra money. My student loan debt was enormous. And because I went straight through from 18 to 25, just master's, PhD, and straight to work here at UL in Lafayette. So I needed some extra money to be able to travel overseas and pay for the flights. I got into travel hacking, and I dove deep into that. But prior to that, I was also with some friends of mine doing an entertainment production company where we would book bands. It evolved into me running to live music venues, and then I was like, no, I got to start traveling. And so
you told me one day you just closed up everything and said, I'm out.
It pretty much happened like that. I was literally on the road in a rental car, and I messaged the guy who ran the kitchen, one of the clubs. I had shut down the larger club a few weeks before that. We had our last show right before my birthday. I believe it was like my 40th birthday, and then the smaller club, I literally messaged the guy who was running the kitchen, and I was like, you can take over the music. That club, I didn't have the bar, but that was the club where we booked the band who told me about Airbnb. And
that's kind of what started.
Yeah, because Californians, everybody knew. And a few people in New Orleans knew about Airbnb. But Lafayette, it was
What year was that?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I rented the car, and I I didn't have a time frame to bring it home, really, and my house was booked for 2 months. 2 guys from New Mexico.
Through Airbnb.
Yeah. And I hosted 2 different groups of people before I ever stayed at an Airbnb. And that's usually not the way it works.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was all done on an app. I mean, the Airbnb app. And so I was getting messages because I had listed my room, my spare bedroom. And at the time, Airbnb had no way to block the listings. So somebody books one of the rooms in your house, and then you have a house, and then the calendar, they didn't know how to block the listings. And so I was getting constant messages, like every 2 or 3 hours, of people wanting to stay in the room, but these 2 guys had rented the whole house for 2 months. And I was like, wow, this is popular, because but nobody in Lafayette knows about it. And so I stayed with friends until I got to Texas. And on the napkin, this band, they told me, they said, you need to go to Marfa, Texas, and you need to go use Airbnb instead of hotels. And that's what started it all. And I stayed in my first Airbnb in a dome concrete shelter in Tulangua, Texas.
And and so you started that Airbnb in 2013. When did you start your travel blog?
2015, 16-ish, yeah.
So you've been doing it for a while now.
Yeah,
what's your travel blog?
It's CajunTraveler.net.
Okay.
And when I first started and I was going to the conferences and learning how to post content and work around WordPress, and I just was all over the place. I posted about all the apps that I use on my phone, about falling in love in South America, and then I would post something about my morning routine, and then I would post something about boiled crawfish and my gumbo recipe. I was all over the place. And in the conferences, the general theme that I was coming back with was you got to find a niche.
A focus.
Yeah. And it was around that time where, and the conferences got me all excited about it. I mean, was teaching full-time, still am, full-time professor. And at that time, I was probably managing about the same amount of houses I have now, about 15 houses. So then that's when I started learning about influencers, and then I started getting on Instagram and taking photography courses. And I was like, well, maybe photography is where I want to be, because I always took photographs. And so I started doing a lot of landscape photography on Instagram and backed off on the posting on the blog. I even started a regional blog called Discover Cajun and made 3 posts. And that was around the time that the pandemic hit.
Wow.
And Airbnb canceled all of our reservations. Full refunds.
Yeah.
And I was managing almost 24 houses at that time. And so that I had to, refocus things, which, and so that's whenever, I started getting on groups on the internet and guys that basically train people how to do their Airbnbs, and that's
so do you promote your Airbnbs with your blog and with your social media? You keep them separate?
I primarily keep them separate. However, when we post on social media, we do hashtag Cajun Stays with the Cajun Traveler and vice versa. I will post things that I'm doing, like this conference. Like, I'll post that on Cajun Stays stuff, but also, obviously, Cajun Traveler. So if something big, we put a link on the website.
Okay.
But it's always something that I felt like I could always do a little bit more of, and it is starting to come together, which is what, we talked about the niche and what my niche is going to be, and I did travel hacking, budget travel, photography, and then a light bulb went off in Nashville when I was promoting a new book that I have a chapter in, and one of the co-hosts, he was getting ready to go on stage, and he was the closing keynote speaker, and we were co-authors of this book.
And what's the book called?
It's called Hospitable Hosts.
Okay.
And they picked 40 authors in 7 countries, and everyone had to tell their story. I guess
they're all Airbnb hosts.
Right. And most of them have multiple. They manage multiple homes for other people, like I do. But we all have our different niche. And this guy was my thing was 5,000 reviews, and I turned my house into a hostel, and I learned it from booking music. And I've also traveled way more than most of these people. And so that was kind of my in for the book. This guy, his niche is building websites so that you can get off of the websites. And then it hit me, that was when we started talking, and I was telling him about this place in Minca, Colombia, this little tiny area where they had 12 units in the jungle, and they got 100% of their bookings through Instagram.
Wow.
And then it hit me, and I was like, Mark, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to connect travel bloggers with short-term rental people. And so since then, I've been to 2 travel bloggers conferences, 3 short-term rental conferences, not just the individuals, but also the brands.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I want to send my focus. But I still can post about food and hotels and Airbnb.
Now, you spoke here at this TBEX, yeah?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And what did you talk about?
My talk was focusing on tips to manage remotely. So, as I mentioned before, there was a time where...
Because a lot of travel bloggers obviously do have a home base, unlike you, and they rent that out while they're traveling. Or they can.
And right at the beginning of the talk, I asked, does anybody have... And there were 2 people in the room that already had... One of them had multiple listings. And so, it's not that weird of a thing. And that's why I don't think it's that weird of a thing that I want to connect these individuals, because we're in the travel industry and we're in the service industry. And so, but my focus, most of the focus of in our space right now is about scaling to 150 to 50 or 100 properties and how to do that. And I knew that this wasn't this focus of this talk. It was more about, if you got a house and you don't know what to do with it and it's just sitting there, why not make money off of it and get into this new industry, and what applies to you as a person with one place where you're only renting it out maybe 5-6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
And that's what I focused on. And I felt like I could have talked for days, and I did after. We got tons of questions, particularly from the people who already had, because these conferences and all the things that I did to save the business during COVID just built up just this wealth of information that, and then promoting the book at the conferences, it was, and being on podcasts. So I've learned so many other tips and tricks that are pretty cutting edge. And it was incredible to be able to share that with people who are maybe just on the fence and they're thinking, wow, okay, this is not as hard as I thought it would be. But there also is a trend in the industry. COVID has actually just exploded the popularity of short-term rentals across the world. And so you are seeing a lot more competition and a lot more hosts. So I mentioned that at the very beginning of the talk, and that was something to hit home, was that, I need to give you cutting-edge tips, things I've just learned this week, where this is what you should focus on so you can separate yourselves. Lafayette has 500 plus hosts, and
this is not that big of a town.
There's 2 companies in New Orleans that manage 80 plus units. 2, besides all the one unit, and so it's like, it's really blown up.
One last quick thing. So you mentioned to me last night there's 3 business models on Airbnb. What are you said rental arbitrage.
Yeah, right. So rental arbitrage is when you don't own the house, there's a landlord and he's got it up for rent, and you approach the landlord and say, I want to rent your house. I'll sign a 6-month year lease. I furnish it, all the bills, just like a long-term lease, but it's going to be on Airbnb. And whether I stay there part of the time or not, and then when you arbitrage, you go to the next house and the next house. A lot of these guys own 5-10 houses maybe. And so that is rental arbitrage. So as long as they put in a lease that you can sublet, and they know that you're doing Airbnb and they're fine with their property insurance and everything, that's arbitrage. The second model would be owner management. And so I have a home. I've added 2 small apartments onto that home. I call it Cajun hostel, and I have bunk beds you can rent out and a private room with a shared bathroom, just like a mini hostel. and also 2 studio apartments. And if you're able to, it's probably the toughest to grow fast, is you're able to buy another house and then buy another one and buy another one and make those into short-term rentals. Then that would be the owner management model. The third model is called co-hosting. And so my next door neighbor, Pat, who runs the festival here, he has always lived
Festival Katie Ann's.
Festival Katie Ann's, yeah. He lives across the street from me.
Yeah.
And he had a long-term property rental right next door. And we just sat one day, and he was like, man, you're making money Airbnb, you're never home. I was thinking about doing that with my house. And I was like, well, I actually have some extra furniture. I'll use my house, keep her my handyman, and we'll put it on Airbnb, and I'll just charge you a percentage. And he's done that with me for still to today. I mean, it's booked for the weekend, and that was 7 years ago. And so that is the rental arbitrage. But then he told someone else, and then they told someone else. And so I've never really had to go out and market the business. People have always come to me. I've had to turn people down because I didn't feel like it was a right fit. And so those are the 3 models. What was really weird for me was that in 2015, like 1.5 years into it, I was doing all 3 models with multiple units, and I didn't know what that was called. And then when COVID hit, I always did my own thing. When COVID hit, I got into these Facebook groups and these training groups and started digging deep. And that's when I started hearing arbitrage, co-host, owner management model,
kind of what the
OTAs and all these. And I'm like, I was doing this 8 years ago, but I didn't know what it was called. So that was what was interesting, and that's what I talk about a lot in the podcast.
So Toby, your podcast.
No. This was, we have short-term podcast is as big in short-term rentals as it is in travel blogging. It's hot. And so, it's mostly, there was one travel blogger who, interviewed me about Lafayette when it was TBEX was supposed to come to Lafayette.
Back in 2020.
Yeah. And then, but the others are all short-term rental podcasters.
Got you.
Yeah.
Well, Toby, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you can, Instagram, I check all the messages at the Cajun Traveler. That's my primary social media platform. And then email is Toby@thecajuntraveler.net.
Well, Toby, thanks for coming on the podcast, and thanks for coming to TBEX so many times, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
See all the links mentioned in this episode in the show notes and on tbexcon.com/podcast.
All right, we are here with Nicole from Explore Houma.
Yeah.
Now, Houma, Louisiana. How far is Houma from Lafayette?
About an hour and 30 minutes. And then Houma is 55 miles from New Orleans.
Okay.
55 miles south of New Orleans, to be exact.
Where does that put you guys, Houma? North, south, east, west?
We are right near the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
Actually, we're more water than land. And that's why we coined the term Louisiana's BayouCountry, because we have 5 major bayous and then a bunch of little ones, and it's the best. So our top pillar is fishing.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We got some fishermen here for sure.
Yes.
So I guess this question you get all the time, how badly was Houma affected by Katrina when that happened?
Interestingly enough, Houma did take a beating, but bayou parishes, they have really, and I'm not sure, I'm actually from New Orleans, just a little background. It's so great to see river parishes, bayou parishes put money, they raised millages and they put money into their levee systems. So for Katrina,
you were prepared.
They were fine. Yeah. And they're surrounded by water, so that's amazing.
Yeah.
The levee systems are great, and they have floodgates and all that. So fast forward to Hurricane Ida, which was devastating for Houma. It was more wind damage, but the water was not an issue, believe it or not.
What? So I'm from San Diego, and we haven't had hurricanes since I was a little kid, but a teenager. But we had several, like 3 years in a row, we had hurricanes. That's the way the Pacific works. You don't have anything for 20, 30 years, and then boom, you get hit with a bunch all at the same time. And what people don't understand if you've never lived in a hurricane area is that the hurricane can wipe out one area and then just a couple miles away have very little damage at all. And yeah, sometimes it's water damage, sometimes it's flood damage. That's why I asked about Houma, because I don't know. You know, of course, we all heard about New Orleans when everything happened, but I was just curious. So Ida was worse for you guys.
It was the worst. It was devastating.
Yeah.
I remember after the storm, because before I got into tourism, I worked in government, and I did the social media for our emergency operations center. Once the storm passed and they cleared the roads for us to go, I was on my way home. My neighbor's house was no more. And my heart stopped for a second, because I'm thinking, it's my neighbor. So surely I live in a little townhome, little 2-story townhome. Surely if their house is gone, then
yours is gone too.
Nothing, not a shingle missing.
Yeah.
To your point.
It's just the angle, the wind is blowing. And
that's the scariest thing about hurricanes. It's like Russian roulette. Like,
yes.
It's all about the angle of the wind, where your house is, do you have good siding, good windows. It's a scary thing, and we were devastated. But what it showed me was how resilient the people in Terrebonne Parish are. You had neighbors helping neighbors put tarps on their roof. You had, usually, the city cleans the streets, but the people who stayed, they were out there the next morning getting debris off the streets and out of the bayous. It was truly an amazing thing to see.
It is interesting how disasters bring out the best in people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When it just brings communities together. It's a shame we got to go through that sometimes to be that way. But
yeah. And not to bring politics into it, but I got to see why certain people have conservative views, because they didn't wait on the government out there.
Yeah. The
people that live there and work there, they did it themselves. They got to work. They donated food and supplies and fixed each other's roofs. And no offense, but weeks later, FEMA was like, hey, y'all need tarps? And we already had it covered, So it was great to see.
Yeah, obviously having our government support us is a good thing for them to be there. But your neighbors have to be there for neighbors when the worst of the worst is happening.
That's right.
Yeah,
that was
how
a
we
big
get through.
lesson.
Yeah,
save your money. Save your money. Have supplies.
COVID was another example of that for all of us in travel. Yeah. So Nicole, let's talk about Houma. Travel is typically just a fun industry to be in. It's a happy industry to be in, and COVID was this devastating thing for all of us collectively. Mm-hmm. So Houma, you said, is more water than land.
That's right.
How many bayous again? 5 bayous?
5 major bayous and then a bunch of little ones.
What is a bayou for anybody that doesn't know? We just heard the song.
Oh, gosh. I don't even know how to put that into words.
Is it a swamp?
It's not a swamp. It's... I wish could we Google that? Let's Google it.
Okay, I'll Google it.
We want to make sure we tell the people the correct.
Okay. And so, but it's a mixture of salt water and fresh water, right? So it's like brackish is what you would call it?
Brackish, redfish, yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Perch.
So I'm looking this up now.
Yeah, let's hear the official definition.
Yeah, I don't have an assistant, so I got to do this myself.
Y'all bear with us.
Yeah. And bayou, B-A-Y-O-U, something like that. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Bayou, Franco-English term for a body of water typically found in the low-lying area. I don't think it's that descriptive.
We are. We are low-lying.
And you said you're right on the Gulf of Mexico.
That's right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do for fun in Houma?
Oh, my goodness. Houma is, I said, number 1, fishing. But cooking, a lot of folklore. You ever heard of the rougarou?
I have not heard of the...
Rougarou is the Cajun version of the boogeyman.
Okay.
It's a wolf, and it sleeps in the swamps. It's amazing.
I have not heard of the rougarou.
It's amazing. We have festivals centered around it.
So it's like Bigfoot.
That's right, but a big wolf.
Okay.
That sleeps in the swamp.
So did your grandma tell you stories about the rougarous going to get you?
You better believe it. You better believe it. It's not that scary, though, because I don't know. There are certain things in the real world that are scarier than the real
I told you my wife's Mexican, they call it the cucuy.
Okay, so that's
it's like the boogeyman, the cucuy.
Cucuy and the rougarou. Watch out. There's that. Houma actually was inhabited by Native Americans, so there's a lot of Native American influence there. Okay. A lot of tribal groups live there. Food. Oh my goodness. There's wet Cajun and dry Cajun.
Okay.
Like Lafayette is more dry Cajun. They shoot and make food out of that, but we're all water. So we fish, we have shrimpers, the big white boots that you see in Houma, that's significant because that's our culture. We have a lot of fish, seafood, crawfish. We eat and we spend time together as family and friends, and crawfish boils. Houma is off the beaten path. It is truly a hidden gem, for sure.
Very good. Very good. So this is your first time to TBEX, right?
Oh, yep, my first time.
So what's your first impression of TBEX?
Oh, it's amazing. It feels like, especially being from Louisiana, we're people here. So it's been great just getting to know people, learning about their culture, talking to them about where I live and why they should visit. It's just been so great. Everyone's been so nice. Meeting all these new people, domestic and international. It's been a real good experience.
Southern hospitality, everybody's
best.
Yeah, it really is. You experience it here. Everybody's so nice.
Oh yeah,
and
genuinely
friendly,
too. That's important to
and
know.
Polite, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I forgot this from coming here when I was a kid, and people didn't call me that when I was a kid, but a lot of people call me Mr. Rick.
Mr. Rick.
Whatever your first name is, I might call you Miss Nicole, right?
Right.
That's just a thing.
That is, and I'll have adults say, "Ooh, please don't call me ma'am."
Yes.
Absolutely not. My mama said, "Ma'am, yes sir, no
that's
ma'am,"
right.
And that's what I'm going to say.
I'm yes sir, no ma'am here all the time.
That's right.
And it feels right.
Yeah, it's just it's a term of endearment, and it's about respect. That's what we're about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the food here obviously is delicious.
Mouth-watering. We don't like when people say spicy. It's not that it's spicy, it's just flavorful.
That's true.
You know? That's the difference.
So there's a big music scene here in Lafayette. Mm-hmm. What's the music like in Houma?
So the first night, or actually when we went to Rock and Bowl.
Yes.
That was like Zydeco, right?
Yes.
Down the bayou, and I'm still learning too because I'm originally from New Orleans.
Yep.
It's more Cajun music. Like we have Cajun jams where you come together, you play the accordion, you play the washboard. It's more of a authentic Cajun. Zydeco is more accordion, and we're more washboards and guitars and really nice swamp sound. Waylon Thibodeau, that's an artist that's really popular.
Let's check out Waylon Thibodeau.
That's right. Check him out. You'll love it.
So is Houma, there's a region here, Lafayette, that call themselves the gateway to Acadiana. Mm-hmm. Is Houma part of Acadiana, or is it a different region?
Different region.
Okay.
We're Louisiana's BayouCountry.
Okay.
We have the most bayous, and because we kind of consider ourselves like, I don't want to say fishing capital, but we're up there because we have so much water.
Okay.
That's right. And we're Louisiana's Bayou Country. People come to Houma to fish. Sportsman's paradise, for sure.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Well, Nicole from Houma, thank you so much. Explore Houma,
That's right.
Thank you.
We want you to come explore.
Well, thank you for joining us at TBEX. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to coming and visiting you all down in Houma.
Yes, come see us, y'all.
All right.
This episode of Travel Matters was hosted by TBEX CEO Rick Calvert and produced by radioguru.co.uk. See more about upcoming TBEX events on tbexcon.com.